Good afternoon. Matt, you ready? I don't have anything to start with,
well, first, before we get into Israel and Iran and also Lebanon, I just want to do the daily flight update.
Sure, on flights from Lebanon. So since I last was here yesterday afternoon, we had one flight go last night from Beirut to Istanbul. There's another flight that left this morning from Beirut en route to Istanbul. These are the U.S. organized flights I've mentioned before. Total of 50 people on the flight this morning. A very small number on the flight last night. I think it was around 13, 14, somewhere around there. To bring the total number of American citizens, legal permanent residents, and their family members who have left on these U.S. organized flights since we started them about a week ago to over 1,100 people. There have been a total of 3,620 available seats on those flights. And then when you add the number of seats on commercial flights that we have been making available, there have been a total of 4,600 seats that we have been able to make available to American citizens, permanent residents, and family members.
So look, demand does not, 13 or 14 people on a flight on a plane that carries 300 passengers does not seem like there's a significant demand. Also 50 people on on a flight that carries 300 people also does not. So one, is there any consideration that right now of pulling these flights down because there's just not enough demand? And secondly, how much has it cost the U.S. government, taxpayers, to organize these flights?
Yeah, so I don't have the cost. I can tell you, obviously, there are two ways to look at it. One is the cost of the flight itself. I don't have the cost. And the number of passengers that ride on the plane would impact the net cost to the federal government. But I don't know the total number for the cost of the plane to do that kind of subtraction.
Okay, if someone could look into that.
Sure, but then with respect to the broader question, so we're going to continue the flights for the time being because we do assess that there is demand. Obviously, we've had more turnout for some flights than others. We've had some flights go out with around 150 people, and then we've had these other flights with fewer. But it is going to be an ongoing question we look at, an ongoing assessment that we make. It also partly depends on the number of seats that are available on commercial airlines and whether those flights continue to take place. I'll just say we believe we have a duty to do everything we can to help American citizens get out of the country. We have been urging American citizens to leave the country for months, and we know that a lot of people wanted to leave, especially over the past couple of weeks. We had people reach out to us and say that they wanted to leave, and then some of them say that and then don't ultimately leave for maybe very good reasons, which is they're worried about their family members or they have other considerations. But ultimately, we can't make people leave, of course. We can make these options available, and we're going to continue to make them available because the safety and security of American citizens is our top priority.
Okay. Now onto the other the more substantive issue of possible Israeli retaliation against Iran, and also what they're planning on doing in Lebanon. Was the secretary able to join from the plane? Was he able to join the call?
The call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, he did join from the plane on his way to Laos.
Okay. And
I will defer to, as always, when it comes to a call involving the President of the United States, I will defer to the White House to speak to the contents of the call.
Well, okay,
I'm sure they'll have a readout coming, and of course they have a press briefing. But I'm not.
Yeah, but has your from this building's perspective, has anything changed since the call concluded?
I don't want to speak to the call at all. I know the White House will have a readout coming, and I'm sure they'll speak to it.
I'm sure it will be incredibly detailed.
I will defer to them on the level of detail, and defer to you on your assessment of how detailed that actually is.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was wondering. You said your duty is to do everything you can to help people to leave Lebanon. One of the options would be calling for a ceasefire. But you don't, obviously. And yesterday you said clearly, you said this a couple of days, that you support Israeli incursions against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But at the same time, you support ultimately a diplomatic solution to this. So how do you square that exactly in concrete terms? How do you square supporting escalation and at the same time thinking that that might lead to a diplomatic solution?
So we have always been very clear that the diplomatic resolution that we want to see is the full implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. That has been our priority, and it's what you've heard from the United States going back to the immediate days after October 7th when Hezbollah began launching rocket attacks against Israel. We ultimately do want to get to a ceasefire, and we do want to get to a diplomatic resolution, and we want to get to a diplomatic resolution that includes Hezbollah finally, after 18 years, fully complying with what that Security Council resolution called on them to do. And those are things that they have not done over the past 18 years since 1701 was adopted. Setting down their arms, withdrawing to north of the Litani River. And it is their refusal to comply with that Security Council resolution that has gotten us to the place that we are today. So yes, we do see Israel having the right to conduct these limited incursions to degrade Hezbollah's capability, to degrade its infrastructure, to inflict losses in terms of the number of militants that it has available to fight against Israel and to launch terrorist attacks on civilians, and ultimately to weaken Hezbollah. And we would like to see the outcome of that being Hezbollah finally agreeing to do what it said it would do 18 years ago. Yeah, Simon.
Yeah, just on the 1701 point, but so you're calling for, you're now, I think in the last sort of 2 weeks, you've started using 1701 as a sort of repeated talking point, but in the actual 3-week ceasefire that you were proposing 2 weeks ago, that was sort of a temporary ceasefire that would hopefully lead to a resolution, but no longer do you want an immediate cessation of violence to move to a diplomatic.
We do want to ultimately get to a ceasefire. As I said, we ultimately want to get to a diplomatic resolution. The situation on the ground has changed from where we are 2 weeks ago. And we hope that this change in situation on the ground will change Hezbollah's calculation ultimately, because even when we were putting forward that ceasefire proposal and trying to get to the full implementation of 1701, I can tell you there were a lot of people, and you see people publicly commenting on this, quite skeptical of whether Hezbollah, even at the end of a 21-day ceasefire, was going to fully agree to go back to the Litani River, given the fact that they have refused to do that for the past 18 years. Maybe their calculation will be different in the days and weeks ahead. That's the proposition that will be tested.
Right, but now there's a ground incursion, so the Israelis are also in breach of what would need to happen to be in that. So are they willing to move back over the border if in the event of a temporary cessation of fighting, not necessarily going all the way to the terms of 1701, but what you were calling for before? It seems that you're no longer calling for that. Right?
So the Israeli government will have to speak to what they will and are not willing to do. But to be clear, when we say that we want to see 1701 implemented, that includes all the provisions of 1701. It doesn't just mean the provisions that apply to Hezbollah. It means Israel withdrawing south of the blue line as well. We want to see every provision implemented, and that includes the provisions, as I just said, for Israel.
And yesterday we spoke a bit about this on the back of this video that Prime Minister Netanyahu put out, where he's basically calling for Lebanese people to rid their country of the scourge of Hezbollah. So you seem to be backing this campaign. That's the Prime Minister of Israel talking about these broader aims. You've come out in support of this campaign, but you seem to be basically supporting an effort to change the politics of Lebanon by force.
So we want the Lebanese people to decide who their leaders ought to be. Bottom line, and that has been our position, that continues to be positioned. We don't want to see any other government in the region dictate to the people of Lebanon who their leader is. We certainly don't want to dictate to the people of Lebanon who their leader is, and we're not going to. We want the Lebanese people to be able to do it, but we want them to be able to do it absent a terrorist organization putting a gun to their head, which is the situation that Lebanon has been in for decades now.
Right.
And so we are hopeful that the stalemate that has existed in Lebanese politics for some time, that for the past 2 years has kept them from electing a president because of Hezbollah's influence, because the way Hezbollah uses force to make its influence known by threat inside Lebanese politics. We hope that the Lebanese political system can break that deadlock, and ultimately we hope that Hezbollah is degraded enough that they are less of a force in Lebanese politics, and that they agree to withdraw back up above the Litani River so 1701 can be implemented.
Right, but whether you like it or not, Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese political landscape, right? So what the Israelis are doing is trying to change that landscape through force, and you're supporting that. So this seems to be a very different approach to calling for restraint, trying to get everyone on board with diplomatic agreements. In the last 2 weeks, we've gone from that to, maybe we could change the government of Lebanon through a ground invasion.
So we have always made clear that we think a terrorist organization should play no role in the government of any country, and especially a terrorist organization that has shown over decades that it is willing to use force and threaten force against the Lebanese people to accomplish its aims and to hold the people of Lebanon hostage. That is not a new position of the United States. That has been our position going back decades. It will always be our position that Hezbollah should not be able to, or should not be allowed to use force against the Lebanese people to accomplish political aims. That hasn't changed. It's not going to change.
And now these sort of broader aims raises a question. What you've come out in support of are limited, I guess, short-term incursions. You won't say how short-term, but how long can this operation continue with the goal of basically ridding Lebanese politics of Hezbollah?
So we are in conversation with the Israeli government about exactly those questions. The goal that Israel is trying to accomplish is to push them back, away from the border. I think it's a separate. What's that?
I mean, is that the goal? They seem to have that goal and other goals.
That is their goal. I will say it is our goal to ultimately see the Lebanese people elect their own political representatives. When it comes to Israel's military goals, I'm not going to make any forecasts. We're going to continue to have conversations with them about it.
Do you believe that Israel's military operations are being effective in such that they are bringing Lebanon closer to the place where it could politically rid its political system of Hezbollah?
I wouldn't want to make any type of assessment today. We have seen so far on the ground limited ground incursions. But as you heard me say previous times at this podium, we are also cognizant of the long history of Israel starting with limited ground operations in Lebanon, turning those into more full-scale ground operations, turning those into occupation, something that we are very clear we're opposed to, we're against. And so we're going to continue to have the conversations with the government of Israel about that, because I think it's quite obvious that there is a point at which what they're doing now turns into something different, and that has obvious political effects inside Lebanon, as well as humanitarian effects on the Lebanese people.
And what is the U.S. definition of limited incursions?
So what we have seen to date have been limited ground incursions, which is the Israeli troops going a short distance across the border, conducting operations, not pushing deep inside Lebanon. I'm not going to offer an expansive definition other than to say we will watch what they're doing and make assessments based on the facts on the ground.
But limited refers to the amount of land that they are going into in Lebanon, not the number of troops that they are deploying.
Yes, at this point, it's the amount of land. And that's a great question, because I think there was public reporting over the past few days that they were deploying additional troops to Lebanon. If you look at what they were doing, they were deploying additional troops to widen their operations across a longer stretch of the border, not to deepen their push inside Lebanon. And those are two obviously very different things.
Just one quick question. We're seeing Israel's military operations in Gaza ramp up again this week. Does the U.S. support these renewed military operations in Gaza that are being conducted?
We will always support their right to go after terrorist organizations. And that, of course, includes Hamas, and that includes Hamas in Gaza. But we continue to have concerns that without a political plan, a plan for the day after in Gaza that includes a political path for the Palestinian people to realize their legitimate hopes and dreams and aspirations, Israel is going to be bogged down conducting these types of operations for some time to come, with obvious terrible humanitarian effects for the Palestinian people, and with real security problems for the Israeli people as well. We do not think a plan to just continue conducting operations in Gaza in perpetuity is one that either benefits the Palestinian people or secures Israel's long-term interests.
But do you see any indication that that isn't their plan as of now?
So we're in conversation with them. We would like to get back to the point of getting to a ceasefire, which would set the stages for an end to the war and would help answer this question about what the future looks like and what the day after looks like for the situation in Gaza. As I've said, over the past few weeks, Sinwar has been unwilling to engage in any meaningful way in the ceasefire talks. I think it is probably reasonable to conclude he's watching what's happening in the north. He's watching Iran's attacks against Israel, and looking and thinking maybe he's about to get what he's always wanted, which is a full-scale regional war, and that may have changed his calculation. But either way, he ought to return to the talks because it is manifestly in the interest of the Palestinian people to get to a ceasefire in Gaza.
And just one more question on Gaza, if you don't mind responding to the reports of Palestinians being shot as they were fleeing northern Gaza.
So we have seen those reports. I can't speak to the details of them, but obviously that would be unacceptable. If they were Palestinian civilians that were fleeing, that were being shot by Israeli forces, that would be unacceptable. We would expect the government of Israel to investigate it, and if appropriate, we'd expect them to hold people fully accountable.
Is the U.S. investigating it?
We are not conducting our own investigations. As a matter of first course, it's appropriate for the government of Israel to conduct investigations. We have been intervened with them in the past about this type of incident, and they've told us they have hundreds and hundreds of ongoing investigations into potential violations of the IDF rules of conduct, and we expect them to conduct those investigations. And as I said, if they show wrongdoing, to hold people accountable.
Have you told them to conduct investigations specifically into these incidents that have occurred this week?
I'm not aware of any specific contact with them about this incident per se, but this is the type of thing that we often communicate with them about, and it's the type of thing we expect them to take action on. Go ahead, go ahead, and then I'll go to Michelle next.
You've said Israel has the right to conduct these incursions. Can you just explain to us if this administration supports the bombing of Beirut?
So when it comes to Hezbollah militants who are in Beirut, Israel has the right to go after the Hezbollah leadership, go after Hezbollah militants who are directing a campaign of terror against Israel and have been directing a campaign of terror against Israel for some time. Now, that said, we want to see them do so in a way that minimizes civilian harm, that prevents civilian casualties, and properly takes into account the risks of going after militants who are operating in a dense urban environment.
And this is part of the ongoing discussions you're having with them?
Yes, all aspects of Israel's military campaign are part of the discussions we were having with them.
Okay, and I know you keep being asked this, I'm going to ask again. Do you have any reason to believe that the Israelis intend to bomb the airport?
I have no reason to believe that they do. I will let them speak to their intent, and we have made clear to them that we want to see the airport stay open, and we want to see the roads to the airport stay open. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to go back to North Gaza quickly. The World Food Program says that there's been no food entering that part of Gaza since October 1st. Are you worried that the Israelis are laying siege on that part?
We are incredibly concerned about the humanitarian situation in all of Gaza, and particularly concerned about the humanitarian situation in North Gaza. And I can tell you it has been the subject of some very urgent discussions between our two governments. We have been making clear to the government of Israel that they have an obligation under international humanitarian law to allow food and water and other needed humanitarian assistance to make it into all parts of Gaza, and we fully expect them to comply with those obligations. Michelle.
Yeah.
Michelle, too.
First, Israel has ordered the residents of Lebanese towns in the south to evacuate to the north of Awali River. It's further north than Litani River. How do you view this order?
So I can't speak to this order. We want to see them we want to see them limit their operations to what we have seen to date, these limited incursions. I can't speak to what this order means, but certainly we want to see these incursions be limited. And ultimately, we want to get back to implementation of 1701, which means the government of Israel withdrawing back behind the border.
And you're supporting the implementation of the UN Security Council 1701, but what about the other Security Council resolution 1559? Do you support?
Obviously, we supported the adoption of that resolution when it was passed in the Security Council, and continue to support it. I will note that there have been a number of UN Security Council resolutions that have passed over the past several decades. It is always the most recent one that is the most operative and the one that we look to and the other international community looks to. But of course, we look at other Security Council resolutions that were adopted with our support and are binding as well.
And there were reports that the U.S. supports the election of the Lebanese Armed Forces Commander, Joseph Aoun, as the next president. Is this accurate? And especially that he will be retired by next January.
Let me be clear about this. We do not take a position one way or the other on who the next president of Lebanon should be. That is a question for the Lebanese people and no one else to decide.
Thank you.
Matt, while you're waiting for Israel to degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities, are you also looking at diplomatic ways and means to convince Iran to weigh in on its proxies, especially Hezbollah, as well as other proxies, to stand down, basically, to give in, as some Israeli media are reporting that there is a back channel talk going on?
So I'm not going to speak to any specific communications, but we have long made clear to the government of Iran, both directly and indirectly, that they should stop funding terrorism in the region, that terrorism only adds to the instability in the region. Terrorism only adds to the horrific levels of conflict that we've seen across the region. Now, look, Iran obviously has decided that it is in their interest to continue to fund Hamas, to continue to fund Hezbollah, to continue to fund the Houthis, who are collectively the primary source of instability in the region. And so while we send those messages to the government of Iran, we also take steps to counter the threats that these terrorist groups that Iran sponsors, funds, arms, pose to everybody in the region.
Sure. The foreign minister is making the rounds in the region. I was wondering if there was anything here being passed on from Washington, wherever he's going, Saudi Arabia, Qatar.
I don't have any messages to speak of from here.
Thank you, Matt. I want to go back to northern Gaza. You said in your answer to Michelle that you did some urgent calls with the Israeli side to allow and demand to allow for the entry of humanitarian aid and all that. What were the response?
I'm not going to speak to the private diplomatic conversations. I'll just reiterate what I said, which is we've made very clear, as we have for some time, that they need to allow humanitarian access in. And if you look at the full sweep of the past year, there have been a number of moments when we had to intervene because humanitarian access was stalled for various reasons, and make clear that we expected the government of Israel to push through those roadblocks, whether they be political, whether they be bureaucratic, whether they be logistic, and ensure that food and water and other aid gets to the people who need it. And that's what we've done in recent days as well.
And regarding also the continued or maybe revival of the military operations and fighting in northern Gaza, there is some talks in Israel that it is a revival of the generals' plan, which is a buffer zone in northern Gaza. I know that you on this podium mentioned so many times that the U.S. position is against any shrinking or occupation of Gaza, but also we know that the Israelis have the habit of testing this American position and apply their own. Do you think that you can stop this from happening if the Israelis want to do it?
Now, we are going to continue to make absolutely clear that it's not just the United States that opposes any occupation of Gaza, any reduction in the size of Gaza, but it is the virtual unanimous opinion of the international community. And we're going to continue to make that clear to them. Simon, go ahead. Yeah.
So you mentioned the roadblocks, whether they be bureaucratic or political. Can you detail, like, what is it that's been holding up aid to Northern Gaza?
I'm not going to get into it from here. Obviously, I'm speaking generally what you've seen over the past years, where you've had members of the Israeli cabinet at times that have taken steps. For example, you had members of the Israeli cabinet supporting protests that blocked aid getting in to Kerem Shalom through Kerem Shalom for a while. You've had bureaucratic hurdles with the government of Israel not always working as well as it should with the various UN agencies, and sometimes logistical hurdles of the same nature. Our message to the government of Israel is that it is important for them to surmount these hurdles, and it's the bottom line that matters, and that's that the people that need food and water, medicine, and other needs get it.
And just, I mean, it's pertinent that you have made an assessment, or the secretary made an assessment that Israel has not been blocking aid, and that was kind of based on the fact that they were making improvements. Since they've gone backward, would you revisit that assessment? It sounds like things have gone backward from that.
So what we said when the secretary made that assessment, and if you look at the language inside the National Security Memorandum report, it's quite clear that this would be an ongoing assessment, and that we expect progress to continue, and that if we see a change in situation, it'll change our policy.
And at the moment, for the purposes of US law, is Israel blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid?
We have not made that assessment at this time, but that goes to the point that it is urgent that they correct the situation and allow humanitarian aid to get in. Go ahead.
On Kyrie's question, on what is happening in northern Gaza and the killing and all this stuff, I think over the past 24 hours, something like 56 Palestinians were killed, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. I mean, has this become really, an accepted kind of daily occurrence, or does it warrant, or doesn't warrant some sort of a, an outrage or a whimper saying, you should not.
It's absolutely not acceptable. No civilian dying in this conflict is acceptable, and it is why the United States continues to push and advocate for a ceasefire that would bring an end to this conflict. But as you've heard me say before, it takes two parties to agree to a ceasefire, not just one.
All right, but what we see, Israel is in control of the area. I mean, they keep going back and so on. Yes, they have asked the hospitals to evacuate or to leave and so on. It just keeps getting repeated and so on. And obviously, going to Ahmed's question on the general's plan and so on, maybe the plan is to make, northern Gaza a buffer zone, maybe not to allow any kind of medical care to force people out. Well, there's 400,000 people trapped in that area.
And that would be absolutely unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, okay, let me ask you a couple of other questions. The Secretary General of the United Nations yesterday, in terms of aid, he said that UNRWA, and those were his words, is indispensable, that you cannot do it without UNRWA. There's absolutely no way to distribute aid without UNRWA. And he says that he reached out, sent a letter to the Israeli Prime Minister telling him that whatever law they pass, would be disastrous, would bring about catastrophe. Do you agree with the Secretary General that UNRWA is essential for the distribution of aid?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very good. Thanks. My last question, Matt, is there's talk of that the Arab states reportedly are putting together a region-wide ceasefire or a region-wide solution, that you cannot do it, piecemeal, that you have to do it all together, and that they reached out to the U.S. Can you share with us if there is such a plan or such a proposal? Can you share with us some information?
So there isn't such a plan or proposal to my awareness. I obviously can't speak to what other countries may or may not be developing on their own, which is not to say that it's happening, but certainly no one has reached out to the United States about such a proposal, and we're not in talks with any countries about such a proposal.
Do you agree with the logic or the principle that you must have a region-wide ceasefire or resolution rather than
So we have always wanted to see a ceasefire in Gaza that would get us to the day after the conflict and allow us to rebuild Gaza and reconstruct Gaza and have a political path forward for the Palestinian people. We want to get to a diplomatic resolution in the north. Now, when you talk about region-wide ceasefires, look, that would require Iran to stop its support for terrorist organizations. Obviously, we would welcome Iran stopping its support for terrorist organizations. Haven't seen any indication at all that that's a step they're willing to consider. In fact, quite the contrary, given their record of doing it for years and years and years.
All right, but the logic is, we agree with the logic that if you have a region-wide agreement or ceasefire, it would be more enduring.
So I cannot speak to a hypothetical proposal that I'm not even sure actually exists in reality. So
I think
obviously, we want to see, we would welcome the end of conflict across the region. We would welcome peace and stability and security across the region. It's a complicated region, has been for some time. That would require a number of actors in the region to stop the actions that they have been taking, not just in the past year, but for decades.
I think the Arab countries are suggesting that, we should have ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon together, and then the other becomes like,
I don't know. I don't know if they are or not. I know there's a news story about it that's different than actual diplomatic conversations. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
So you said earlier that Israel has a right to attack Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. I wanted to ask if you had seen the Israeli Prime Minister's video that he put out in English to the people of Lebanon last night. He had a couple lines in there. He said, "You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. I say to you, the people of Lebanon, free your country from Hezbollah so that this war can end." That seems like a blanket threat against the civilian population. Is that terrorism?
So first of all, let me say we cannot and must not see the situation in Lebanon turn into anything like the situation in Gaza. That would, of course, not be acceptable. And ultimately, it is as I said in response to an earlier question, it is up to the Lebanese people, not anybody else, to decide on who their government is. I said in response to another question, no country in the region should dictate to the Lebanese people who their leaders are. Not Israel, not the United States, not any of the other countries in the region, and that should continue.
But Israel is dictating
to be the case. No, they're conducting operations going after a terrorist organization. That's a different thing than dictating what the civilian government should be. That's a question for the Lebanese people to decide. So,
but if they decide against Israel's wishes, Israel is threatening Gaza-like annihilation of the people of Lebanon.
And I'm making very clear that there should be no kind of military action in Lebanon that looks anything like Gaza and leaves a result anything like Gaza.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. As the Iraqi government is working tirelessly to shield Iraq from the consequences of this war, in the next 10 days, the Kurdistan region is going to have an election that the US government was so encouraging the Kurdish political parties to have it even sooner than this time. So how do you see the process of this election and the campaign process overall?
So elections are a vital element of the democratic process. We support all efforts to ensure they are free, fair, and transparent and occur without further disruption or delay. And we commend the active participation of civil society and the media for supporting political discourse and raising awareness around issues of importance to Iraqi Kurdistan region residents in the lead up to these elections.
And does the US government monitor this election closely, or will there be any US agencies on the ground on the election day to monitor the process?
So we are in close contact with Iraq's Independent High Electoral Commission, as well as the UN Assistance Mission for Iraq, as they ensure that election preparation meets key milestones, and staff volunteers from U.S. Mission Iraq will participate in observing the elections at polling sites across the IKR. That's something we're doing in coordination with the United Nations, international election experts, and other like-minded diplomatic missions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I just want to clear up the name of the person I mentioned yesterday in a press meeting was, the UNRWA Teachers Association of Lebanon is actually Fatah Sharif Abu El-Amin. That's going to get it off the top of the mind, and apologize for getting that name wrong. But I wanted a couple questions regarding Israel.
No need to apologize. I get things wrong up here all the time.
Well, I appreciate it. In light of October 7th, Israel attacked memorials.
I don't think I can let that snarky comment pass by.
Well, thank you, Matt. In light of the October 7th, recently Israel attacked memorials. how has Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, the Biden administration's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, addressed the global false claims that Israel has been committing genocide? And why has the ambassador, whose portfolio is to combat Jew hatred, been silent about the most virulent Jew hatred? And just a quick follow-up.
So I think that is a misrepresentation by far and a mischaracterization of her work over the years since October 7th and her work since she assumed that position. She speaks out on a regular occasion against anti-Semitism anywhere it occurs around the world. You only have to look at her public statements, her public appearances. She has been a vocal advocate against anti-Semitism.
Okay, why hasn't America's ambassador, Deborah Lipstadt to the United Nations, taken up this cause in the United Nations to call on world leaders to dispel this lie, a lie which provokes such anti-Jewish activity and policy? And often I hear statements about referring to Israel as committing genocide. So this is an important issue to address. So why hasn't America's ambassador to the United Nations taken up this cause at the United Nations to dispel this lie?
We have spoken to it at the United Nations and made clear what our position is. Yeah. That we do not believe that Israel is.
Yeah, I get that, but again, on the names, Deborah Lipstadt is not the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations unless something has happened to LTG.
I thought you
in the
first
last
was
20
asking why
minutes.
she hasn't gone to the United Nations and presented, but could be either.
Actually, that's what I was asking was, why she hasn't gone to the United Nations.
Well, we have other individuals inside the State Department who are charged with speaking before the United Nations and making clear our positions. No, most, as a first matter, of course, our ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, she's made clear our position on numerous occasions.
So you clearly don't believe that Israel is guilty of committing genocide, which we've heard from the International Criminal Court and some of the others.
Yeah, correct. We've made that quite clear.
Thank you, Matt. A few questions. One is a question our colleagues have had trouble getting answers on is regarding Amos Hochstein, a key administration envoy to the Middle East who also in the past served in the Israeli military. There's confusion on his national status. Could you clarify whether he was ever a dual national or an Israeli national before and whether he gave that up?
Now, I don't personally know, and Amos Hochstein does not work for the State Department, so any questions about him I would direct to the White House.
Okay. On another note, it's now been 120. Excuse me.
But I would also say it's well, never mind. I won't tangle with the question anymore. Go ahead.
It's now 254 days since Israeli forces killed him on the job. While the IDF they maintain that this claim that they weren't in the area, our colleagues at Sky News said it's, quote, undeniable that they were, affirming a string of reporting that we've seen saying as much. The IDF then disputed that report and also said there's no misconduct investigation into that incident. So what's going on here? It's nearly been 9 months of the U.S. saying it's waiting for Israel to investigate itself. At one point, Israel even reportedly lying.
That's not what we said with respect to this particular investigation. With respect to this particular incident, we encouraged the government of Israel to work with parties on the ground that said they had information. The government of Israel said to us, and it said publicly, that none of those parties came and gave them the information that they have said publicly.
Right, and then
it's just a different
matter. Thank you for clarifying. And then the Red Crescent, they claimed that Israeli forces never reached out to them on the investigation.
Correct.
But all to say, this has been nearly 9 months of this. This case is, of course, just illustrative of tens of thousands of kids killed. So how exactly is the U.S. approaching this if on this case, 9 months later, Israel is now saying there's no investigation into this incident? And how can the U.S. keep unconditionally sending more weapons if this is how Israel is dealing with investigations of potential violations?
So let's separate a couple of different things. This is, as I said, a little bit of different matter than other investigations into potential violations, which the government of Israel has said that they are conducting. You should go to them for questions about what they may or may not be doing. And with this one where they've said, and I know the Red Crescent has said something different, we're not in a position to ultimately adjudicate which bit of information is accurate and which is not. I can tell you what we are doing on behalf of the United States government, which is conducting our own assessments of a variety of incidents that raise questions about violations of international humanitarian law, and those assessments are ongoing.
Is this one of them?
I'm not going to speak to individual assessments. I've always made clear that's not something I'm going to do. There are a number of incidents that are under review and continue to be under review.
So this just gets to one, I guess, broader question. The U.S. and yourself have noted that, of course, this is a complicated conflict, but why then has the U.S. response over this year been, I mean, in other words, just kind of binary? For example, After the IDF killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers, including an American, there were, of course, calls for investigation, urgings for accountability. The department then said in NSM 20 that it couldn't reach a conclusion of whether U.S. weapons were used in that attack. Result, more weapons have been sent. After the IDF killed American Aishanor Egi, there were calls for investigation. No updates. Just yesterday,
Investigation that's ongoing.
right, but yet just yesterday, Representative Pramila Jayapal noted that she had sent a letter to the State Department asking for information on what accountability measures are being taken, whether there will be an independent investigation. She hasn't heard back, and this.
And we will write back to her. I'm only intervening because like sometimes when there are 4 premises getting up to the question, it's kind of hard to remember them all when we get to the ultimate question. So we will respond to the Congresswoman, of course. We have made clear there needs to be full accountability if merited when that investigation concludes, and we'll continue to wait to see the results of the investigation. So get to the question, maybe.
Yes. There's Hindu job. There's all these hundreds of journalists that have been killed, medical workers, over and over again, despite the conflict being complicated. The question is to send more weapons or not to send more weapons. There's no notion of conditioning weapons on just completing investigations, respecting human rights, let alone stopping illegal settlements or the occupation. Why is that the case?
We continue to make clear that we are committed to the defense of Israel. That is a position that is not going to change. They are a country that are under threat from a terrorist organization in Gaza, Hamas, that we saw what horrible brutality they were willing to inflict on October 7th. And they continue to be under threat from a terrorist organization in the north, Hezbollah, that has launched rockets for a year targeting Israeli civilians. They continue to be under threat by Iran that has launched ballistic missiles on 2 separate occasions at the state of Israel. So we're going to continue to come to their defense. But at the same time we come to their defense, we're going to continue to insist that they conduct their military operations in a way that minimizes civilian casualties. Go ahead. Oh, I'll come to you next time.
Are there foreign countries sending aid to Florida amid Hurricane Milton? Has state been in touch with countries in coordinating assistance to Florida?
I'll have to take that back and get you an answer.
Okay, and we learned that, I'm going to butcher this name, sorry. Zhu XU and then XIAOLEI, a Chinese national and former student at the Berkeley College of Music, sentenced to 9 months in prison for threatening a pro-democracy activist, went back to China as part of an exchange for an American to come back to the States. Can you confirm that?
I don't have any comment on that.
And then what are America's red lines when it comes to ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and Hamas?
We have made clear we want to see a ceasefire in Gaza. I think we've made quite clear what the general outlines of that ceasefire should look like. The president made a speech about it. The secretary has spoken to it on any number of occasions, and we want to ultimately see a diplomatic resolution.
But what are the red lines specifically?
I'm not going to speak to our diplomatic
Before we
conversation.
leave the region, I got 2 really brief ones on Lebanon. One, are you aware of the Lebanese arresting a dual national who also happens to be is a UK, Israel, and U.S. citizen, and then deporting him?
So
you know anything about
we have
this,
seen
journalists?
so we have seen reports on that question. I checked into it just before I came out here. We're gathering information on what exactly took place at this time.
Okay, but so
I don't have any
you don't
further.
know if the Lebanese ever informed you about
I don't
this?
have. Yeah, I don't have anything further.
And
than
then
the
secondly, can you just what is the status of U.S. assistance to the LAF?
I'll have to go back and check. I know that we have provided assistance to the Lebanese Armed Forces over a number of years. That's been ongoing. I don't know the current assistance, but we very much support the mission that they.
All right. Can someone try and get a
check on that? Yeah.
Thank you.
Something you said earlier about these ongoing assessments in response to the question about Hayan Rajab. Can you tell us what are these assessments? Are these under the Churg process that you've mentioned before? There's obviously Leahy. What are we talking about with those?
We have a whole variety of assessments that are underway, but I'm just not going to speak to them publicly.
Okay, and is there any timeline, or these can just go on indefinitely?
We want to get them concluded as soon as possible.
Okay. The other thing, just to follow up on something came up yesterday with this question of the amount of money that the U.S. has sent to Israel during the course of this conflict. You said that the number produced by Brown University was incorrect. Do you have a number that you can give yet?
Yeah, I did go back and dig into this, and the answer I think shows why it's such a complicated question. So since October 7th, the department has provided $6.8 billion in foreign military financing to the government of Israel. That's financing that we provided them that they then used to purchase U.S. weapons. $3.3 billion of that was in the memorandum of understanding between our two countries that was signed somewhere around a decade ago, and that continues to be in effect. And then there was an additional $3.5 billion that was included in the supplemental. So that is money that we have provided to Israel to purchase U.S. weapons. It's not the same as the amount of weapons that Israel has actually purchased and that have been delivered in the past year, which gets to why this is a difficult question. So we have approved $5 billion in actual government-to-government sales. Most of that $5 billion would come out of that $6.8 billion. But not all of it would be from that $6.8 billion, because some of it would have been money that was provided to Israel in previous years that they had not yet spent down. So that gets you to why it's a bit of a tricky question to answer, whether you're looking at it as money that we have provided to Israel for weapons purchases or actual purchases that they have made. And then there's another $500 million that's a separate pot of money that the State Department doesn't administer, but it's for missile defense. It's administered out of the Pentagon, that is also contained in the memorandum of understanding that we provided as well.
My arithmetic's not that great. Could you?
It's probably better than mine.
Could you just tell me what are the
government and English majors? So if you're going to ask me to do math here at the podium, we're in for trouble.
I have a sociology degree, so but if you add those numbers together, all the different programs, the number comes out. What is the number? You're setting your own parameters here.
So I mean that's what I mean. That's why it depends what you're looking at. So if you take the 6.8 that we provided them in foreign military financing, there's 6.8 and another 500 million in missile finance. That would be 7.3. But not all that money has been spent in the past year, right? That's money that's been provided them. It's a different question than what has actually been delivered. Even if you look at that $5 billion that they have spent, not all of those weapons were delivered in the past year. So they spent that money. Some of those won't be delivered for years to come. Then there's the entire separate question of sales that we notify to Congress. This sometimes draws public attention. So we notify Congress of a potential sale to Israel. Congress signs off on that sale, and it gets reported that we've approved, say, $2 billion in sales. This is money that Israel does not yet have, that they expect to get under future tranches of money under the memorandum of understanding, and will spend in future years. So oftentimes when you see reports about money that we have provided them for the delivery of, say, of F-16s, that's money that's not going to be spent by Israel for years and years to come. That gets why I'm not trying to overstate it, but it's a tricky question to answer.
I guess there's been various U.S. government statements on support for Ukraine that have been able to come up with numbers, right? Often because for the purposes of trying to emphasize how much support you've given, right? So is there not just a number that we can say, all right, since October we've this amount has been newly approved?
So it is an entirely fair question, and the answer is because the Ukraine money is exercised under a completely different program. It's exercised under the drawdown, and the drawdown we are able to say exactly what we're providing and how much that money costs, because that is money, that is equipment that is in our stocks right now. And whenever we make those announcements, we're able to look and see we are providing them with these specific items and they cost this amount of money. It's very different than looking at an overall relationship that is much more complex, that is much more longstanding, in which Israel exercises authorities under different programs. Those are programs I was just going through, foreign military financing being the chief most way in which we provide them with support.
But Matt, can you not just tell us how much of that 6.8 billion FMF over the last year has actually turned into delivered weaponry to Israel?
So I can't, because it gets to this question. $5 billion, first of all, not all the 6.8 will be spent this year, right? $5 billion has been spent by the government of Israel for these FMF sales over the past year. Some of that $5 billion is from the 6.8. Some of it is leftover FMF from previous years. Some of that has been delivered in this year, but there are other things that will have been delivered that Israel would have purchased before October 7th, but the deliveries don't happen until later. So that's why it's a tricky question. We don't do an accounting based on delivery dates, right? We do an accounting based on when the government purchased something from us. And so I don't have an accounting of, like, let's say there was something that they purchased in 2018 and it was delivered in March of this year. That wouldn't be contained in this number. It's part of our long-term security arrangement. And it wouldn't, it's not, we don't track it that way. We track it based on the amount of money that we've provided to them in any given year. And I'm trying to give you the best information I have on that.
Can I just move away from the Middle East for something on the domestic front?
If you will let me move away from math, you can go to whatever you want to talk about.
There's also nothing wrong with sociology degrees, but anyway. I just wanted to ask about this, the charges that were announced by the Department of Justice yesterday against an Afghan citizen. His name is Nasir Ahmed Toedi. And he's been charged for conspiring to commit a terrorist attack on election day, US election day. Do you have any information about whether he came to the US as an SIV? We gather that it was after the fall of Kabul, but not necessarily related to the fall of Kabul, if there's anything you have on that.
I don't at this time. We're looking into it. I know the Department of Justice said in the indictment that he came on an SIV. It's not clear that that's actually accurate. I know we are talking to other government agencies about it. Ultimately, I would refer to the Department of Homeland Security for that question about someone's status. I would say, of course, and you've heard us talk about this, we've testified to Congress about it. We have extensive vetting procedures in place for the SIV program. It's a program that has wide bipartisan support because it's a program we use to bring to America Afghan nationals who assisted the United States military, assisted the United States government, sometimes at great personal peril and great personal risk during the years that we are in Afghanistan. It's been an incredibly successful program. Now, that said, when it comes to threats against the homeland, there of course continues to be a threat against a terrorist threat against the United States. We've seen terrorist threats from immigrants, and we've also seen terrorist threats over the years from American citizens. And when it comes to a terrorist threat by anyone, we, the United States, through our intelligence community and our law enforcement community, takes those incredibly seriously. We monitor them, we disrupt them, as you saw the FBI do with this plot that was announced yesterday. And with that, we'll wrap for today. Thanks. I'm going to wrap for today. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So the safety of all Americans is the Biden-Harris administration's first priority. As the security situation in Lebanon becomes increasingly volatile, I want to take a moment to talk about the numerous steps the Biden-Harris administration is taking to support Americans who seek to depart or relocate within Lebanon. We are working around the clock to help Americans in Lebanon by providing as many options as possible to depart and offering loans to U.S. citizens who need assistance. Since September 27th, the United States has secured more than 4,000 airplane seats for American citizens, lawful permanent residents, and their family members to depart Lebanon. We have reserved seats for Americans and their family members on daily commercial airlines that continue to fly out of Beirut, and we have organized additional flights for U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and their spouses, children, and parents to depart Lebanon. As long as the Beirut airport remains open, we will continue to make more airplane seats available daily. To date, the number of seats available continues to exceed demand. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut remains open and can help Americans who need emergency passports or other documentation. We urge Americans to take advantage of these options. Ultimately, a diplomatic resolution is the only way to achieve lasting stability and security across the Israel-Lebanon border. We are in discussions for when we will be able to achieve that. Now, earlier today, as many of you saw, the president and the vice president received an update regarding Hurricane Helene response and recovery efforts. Under their leadership, FEMA has provided $344 million in direct assistance to survivors, along with an additional $180 million to ensure our federal partners can carry out their critical recovery work. More than 8,000 federal personnel are deployed, including FEMA disaster survivor assistant teams that are in the neighborhoods across the affected states, helping survivors apply for assistance. These personnel across the Southeast, including Florida, will both continue Hurricane Helene recovery efforts and respond to the impacts of Hurricane Milton. As the president has said, we will be there for the communities devastated by the storm for as long as it takes. The president and the vice president received a briefing on the administration's life-saving preparations ahead of Hurricane Milton. The president continues to mobilize a whole of government effort to prepare for Hurricane Milton. Earlier this week, the president quickly approved the state of Florida's and the Seminole tribe of Florida's request for an emergency declaration pre-Milton landfall. He directed his team to keep working to increase the size and presence of our efforts as we prepare for Milton's landfall. The president spoke directly to Governor DeSantis, Tampa Mayor Castor, Clearwater Mayor Rector, and Pinellas County Chairwoman Peters to make sure we are meeting their needs, and gave them his personal number so they can call him directly. At the president's direction, the administration has been in touch with more than 60 local officials in cities and counties along the likely path of impact to ensure needs are met in advance of the storm. The president gathered his cabinet representing 16 agencies and departments to ensure every corner of the U.S. government is assisting with Helene recovery and preparations for Milton. And at the president's direction, FEMA Administrator Criswell will travel to Florida tonight to join the personnel on the ground and ensure every Floridian gets the help that they need. FEMA is pre-staging a full slate of response capabilities in Florida and the region, including 8 urban search and rescue teams, 3 U.S. Coast Guard swift water rescue teams, 15.6 million meals, 13.9 million liters of water already pre-positioned, an additional 20 million meals and 40 million liters of water ready to deploy as needed. More than 1,000 staff already in the region. And as the president and the vice president have said, any attempts to price gouge Americans, whether at the gas pumps, airport, or hotel counter during this storm, are unacceptable. The Justice Department, FTC, and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau put out a statement warning consumers about those looking to take advantage of natural disasters. The administration will also continue to work out and call out misinformation and conspiracy theories around the storm and federal and state responses. This is wrong, dangerous, and it must stop immediately. You heard the president speak to this just moments ago. Everyone, especially those in positions of power, must do everything they can to encourage survivors to register for assistance, not discourage them by allowing these falsehoods to fester. This storm will be catastrophic. It will be catastrophic. We urge everyone to listen to local officials, and if you are told to evacuate, do so. Please do so immediately. If you can't evacuate or need a safe place to shelter, text shelter and your zip code to 43362 to get a list of open shelters near you. With that, I will turn it over to Administrator Criswell, who is joining us virtually. Thank you so much, Administrator. I know you are incredibly busy today, but thank you for your time. And with that, I'm going to just turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Karine. So good afternoon, everybody. As you just heard from Karine, I just had an opportunity to brief President Biden and Vice President Harris on our preparatory actions as we prepare for Hurricane Milton to make landfall in Florida. The entire federal family is leaning forward for Milton's response. And right now, I am in North Carolina, continuing to lead the response and recovery efforts for the impacts to Helene across many states. But I will be traveling this evening to Florida to be with the team that I have there on the ground, as well as meet with the governor and his team to make sure that we are working side by side to meet the needs of Floridians as Hurricane Milton passes through the state. I want to deliver a very important message to the people of Florida. This is going to be a catastrophic storm. It is going to be a potentially deadly storm. Please listen to your local officials as they will be giving you the best information about what you need to do where you are located. This storm is going to bring deadly storm surge, intense winds, flooding, but it is already bringing tornadoes across Florida. So if you do get an emergency message on your phone right now for a tornado warning, please seek shelter immediately. My heart goes out to all of the Floridians who have been in the path of many storms. They have had impacts from Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Debbie, Hurricane Idalia, and now Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. Floridians, they're no strangers to these storms, but this one, Hurricane Milton, it is expected to be catastrophic. And I promise you that FEMA is ready. FEMA and the entire federal family will be there to provide those immediate life-saving activities and begin to stabilize the incident after the storm passes. And again, I will be there on the ground to assess the impacts and prioritize the movement of federal resources to where the state needs them most. Today, tonight, and tomorrow, these are going to be tough as we watch the impacts move across Florida. And again, we're already seeing impacts from this storm with tornadoes and high winds happening in different parts of Florida. The most important thing is your safety. And I need everyone listening to do everything you can to protect yourself and your family as Milton passes. Some of you may still be able to safely evacuate. Others, it may be too late. Again, I need you to listen to your local officials. They will know exactly what you are still able to do. And if you receive, again, a tornado warning on your phone, through a NOAA radio, or from your local officials, there are tornadoes that are happening now. You need to seek shelter immediately. I have also been in contact with Governor DeSantis, Mayor Castor, Mayor Welch, and Mayor Dyer, as well as all the tribal nations in Florida that are in the path of this storm. The president's swift approval of the pre-landfall emergency declaration for Florida, as well as the Seminole Tribe of Florida, allows us to be able to employ the resources that we have staged to immediately begin to save lives and support the response activities. In addition to the thousands of people that I already have on the ground in Florida for Hurricane Helene, as well as the previous storms from previous years, at the President's direction, I sent an additional 1,200 search and rescue personnel, 6 incident management assistance teams, multiple power assessment teams, and dozens of medical facility assessment personnel into the area pre-landfall. We've also staged over 500 ambulances, and the search and rescue teams include high water vehicles and air assets as well as boats to support those life-saving activities in the first hours after the storm passes. As you heard Karine say, we've also pushed millions of meals and liters of water into Florida to support those immediate needs. And let me be clear, the movement of these resources and these commodities are not taking away from our ongoing response and recovery efforts in North Carolina and the other states that were impacted by Hurricane Helene. We are built for this. We have managed multiple simultaneous catastrophic incidents before, and we are prepared to do this again. And I want the people to hear it from me. FEMA is ready. Our agency is postured to respond to this storm and maintain our current response and recovery efforts for Hurricane Helene impacted states. And we will be providing, and I will be providing regular updates to President Biden and Vice President Harris as this storm passes, so we can make sure that we are getting all of the federal resources that are needed to support their response. And they have directed me, as they always do, to make sure that Floridians continue to get everything they need. I want to be clear, we at FEMA stand ready to both continue our support to Hurricane Helene and respond to the impacts from Hurricane Milton. This is what we do best. We manage complex incidents. We coordinate, we communicate, and we respond. And again, I will be traveling to Florida later today so I can join my team as well as our state partners that are in the field preparing for the impacts from Hurricane Milton. My leadership team, they are the best of the best. They are trained to work across multiple states and support the impacts that states are going to be feeling. And I want everybody to know that we are prepared for what we need to do to support Florida as well as all of the other states. Before I take questions, I just want to emphasize once again, because this is extremely important. People need to listen to their local officials. They need to take this storm seriously. It's going to hit the west coast of Florida as a major hurricane, and it will still be a hurricane as it departs on the eastern coast of Florida. There will be flooding, there will be tornadoes, storm surge. Take the actions you need to protect yourself and your family. We do not need to lose any lives as a result of this storm. We have the time to prepare. Make sure that you're taking those actions now. And with that, Karine, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Administrator. I just want to remind folks that she can only hear us, can't see us. So I'm going to start calling on folks right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you making this time. Do you have an estimate of the universe of how many people are not heeding the evacuation orders and remain at risk?
I do not have an estimate, but what I can tell you is that I was in Florida on Monday. I met with the mayor of Tampa and the mayor of St. Petersburg, and I saw people leaving the area. People are listening. They are leaving. But we know there's always a few that want to stay behind and protect their home. This storm is different. This storm is going to bring deadly storm surge. And so I want people who still have time to evacuate to make sure that they're doing so, but doing so safely under the guidance and the advice of their local officials.
Go ahead, MJ.
Thank you, Administrator. This is MJ Lee with CNN. The White House has been talking a lot about the threat of misinformation, disinformation as it relates to storm recovery efforts. Can you talk to us about whether there's one piece of incorrect information that you think, in your view, has been most damaging, that you think would be most important to clarify?
Well, honestly, I think all of it is damaging to our ability to be able to reach people. It's intentional to create distrust, and that level of distrust is, as the president said earlier today, un-American. And what we need to do is make sure people can get the assistance that they need and they deserve. And so I want people to be able to come to us, register for assistance, so we can help them on their road to recovery.
Go ahead, Nandita.
Thank you. Administrator, you have said that FEMA has enough money to get through both hurricanes, Helene and Milton, but that you're assessing how much more you need from Congress. Is there an assessment that you can share with us?
We're continuing to make that assessment, as we do not know what it's going to cost us right now to get through Hurricane Milton. I think, as I've briefed all of you before, we went into immediate needs funding in August of this year. That allowed me to make sure I had enough money for this response, and I needed that for Hurricane Helene. Without going into INF, I probably would not have had enough money to support Hurricane Helene. With the full authority to spend against the president's fiscal year 25 budget, I've been able to start paying the recovery projects that we put on hold. But the amount that we're spending for Hurricane Helene and the amount that we anticipate we're going to spend for Hurricane Milton, we are watching that very closely and assessing it every day so we can have a good estimate of how much more that we will need to be asking for in a supplemental.
Good, Selena.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Administrator Criswell. Selena Wayne with ABC News. Could you give any specific examples about the real-world impact that this misinformation is having, both in terms of, are you seeing people who aren't taking precautions because they don't trust the government or FEMA or NOAA? And then in terms of the threat to FEMA workers, have you seen examples of threats against them on the ground?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that what I am hearing is people that are not coming to us and asking us for assistance. They're not registering for the help that they need, or they are afraid to approach some of our staff because they are unsure of what the government is doing. I think one of the biggest ones that I continue to hear is that we're going to take their land from them. Simply untrue. When you register for assistance, we give you an initial amount of money, $750, to help support those immediate needs. And there were rumors out there that if you received this money and you didn't pay it back, that we would take your home. Simply untrue. This is a series of assistance that we give over time, those immediate needs. We've already given out over $60 million in North Carolina alone for people's property losses, as well as this immediate assistance. We will continue to give that money out. And as it relates to my staff, I mean, it's just demoralizing. I think that if they take it personally, they have left their families and their homes to come here and support people in need, but they're focused. They continue to stay focused on why they're here. They know their purpose, and that is to help people, and we'll continue to do that.
Go ahead, Gabe.
Thank you, Administrator. You said before that you have dealt with misinformation in the past. Why do you think that misinformation is so rampant this time around? Is it because of the election? Is it because of certain politicians? Is it because of tech platforms? Or is it because of potentially a foreign actor?
Yeah, I mean, I have definitely seen misinformation before. We have had misinformation for, a long time, but we have seen it increase recently. We saw a significant increase in the response in Maui, and even more, the greatest amount that I've seen in this response to Hurricane Helene. I don't want to speculate as to why we're seeing this increase. It's just damaging, and it just makes it harder for us to do our job, and it's a distraction for the people that are out there doing really hard work to help the people get the assistance that they need and deserve.
Ken?
Could you just describe the storm is going to be making landfall late at night on the West Coast. To what extent does that add to the complications or the dangers for residents? And just how unique is it, the fact that it will be a hurricane when it hits the West Coast, but also a hurricane when it exits the East Coast of Florida?
I think anytime we see a storm hit during the evening, it just complicates things, right? Because we know that we will have power outages as a result of this. It will be dark. People will have to try to protect themselves without the same level of light that they're used to. It just creates a whole other level of complication. But as we heard from Director Brennan earlier today, it is very rare for a storm to be a hurricane when it makes landfall and as it exits the state. It's going to move quickly, according to him, through the state, but that means it's going to create these catastrophic impacts across the state. We're going to see the most significant with storm surge on the West Coast, but we know from Hurricane Ian how much inland flooding and flash flooding that happened on the East Coast in the Orlando area. And so we're concerned about that. And that's why I talked to the mayor of Orlando earlier today to make sure he knew that even though the West Coast is getting a lot of focus on this, that the East Coast is going to have significant threats as well. And that's why I've also got incident management teams right there in the Orlando area to help work side by side with the local officials so we can get those resources in as quickly as possible when this storm is making landfall and moving across the state.
And I know, Administrator, you have to head out. Akela, you have the last question.
Okay. Hi, Administrator. I'm just wondering if the administration is confident that the election will still be able to be conducted by November, that power outages, that roads will be safe to drive on so voters can cast their ballot.
So, you know, the election piece is with the states, and we have resources that we can help them with to ensure we meet whatever needs that they have, and we'll continue to work with them if they have any specific requirements.
Thank you so much, Administrator. Safe travels. I know
Thanks,
you've been in
Karine.
North Carolina for some time helping on the ground there. We really appreciate everything that you're doing, and safe travels to Florida tonight.
Thanks,
Thank
Karine.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Amr?
Great. On the Netanyahu call earlier today, was the president told by Prime Minister Netanyahu how he intends to respond to Iran after the October 1 attack? And then secondly, the Prime Minister's office and President Trump have confirmed they spoke last week. Was the White House informed of that call ahead of time? And do you know the contents of that call? And just generally, are you comfortable with that type of conversation happening?
So look, a couple of things. You just asked me a slew of things there. I do want to say, I know there's the rabbi call that the president's going to be doing momentarily. We'll let you know when that happens. I think we're running a little bit behind, and I know that there's going to be an opportunity for all of you all to tune in. Let me just give you a couple of just top lines on the call. It lasted about 30 minutes. It was 30 minutes long. It was direct. It was productive. Obviously, the call that the president had with the Prime Minister of Israel. They discussed a range of issues, and we are going to have a readout shortly that you all will have to get a better sense of what was discussed on the call. So I'm not going to get ahead of that. I know the team is working through that at this time. So as you all know, the U.S. and the Israeli government have had discussion since last week. Certainly since after the Iran attack. And so those discussions continued with the president and the prime minister. Certainly not going to get into those discussions. There's going to be a readout. Don't have anything else beyond that to share, but I can say that they did have a discussion about that. And it is a continued discussion. It started off with obviously staff level discussion last week. And obviously the two leaders had an opportunity to talk directly. Like I said, it was productive. It was direct. It lasted about 30 minutes. And this is on top of more than a dozen calls that the president and the prime minister have had since October 7th of last year. As it relates to one of your questions there about the book. Look, as you know,
about the Trump conversation last week.
Oh,
did I ask about the book as well? But
come back to the book.
We can come back. There's plenty of questions. I'd like to answer that as well. But particularly about Trump's conversation, I think that's more pertinent to today's.
We'll say more about the Trump conversation.
So Trump spoke with Netanyahu last week.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
You guys aware of that?
Look, I don't. That's something for obviously the Trump team to speak to. I can't speak to that about their conversation. I just don't have anything to add beyond that.
More relevant. Are we having like two different, a former administration and a current administration doing foreign policy at the same time?
As you know, there's one president at a time. That has been the way that we've done this, right, in this country, and so that is what exists. The current president, the President Biden, had a conversation with the Prime Minister They've had, as I mentioned, more than a dozen conversations since the past year, since October 7th of 2023. And I think what you have seen from this administration is the continued support for Israel's security. You saw that over the past couple of days, obviously since past couple of weeks, when Iran attacked Israel, the president directed his military to protect Israel. He was very proud to be able to do that, and that support continues. They had as I said, a direct, a productive conversation, as they've had for many times. This is, when you think about the president and the prime minister, they've known each other for decades, and so that's what I can speak to. I'm not going to get into the former president and his conversation with world leaders.
If I can just ask one about the book.
Yep.
Russia said today that the COVID testing material that was given to Putin by Trump was nothing abnormal. Back then, there was a lot of trading going on of material. Is that true? And then if it is true, why was the president going after Trump yesterday at the KC fundraiser over giving Putin this material?
I mean, look, that was a political event, so I'm going to let the president speak to what he said at that event. I'm not going to say go beyond that. What I will say is, as it relates to what happened in the last administration, how then the president behaved and what he was able to do, whatever is being reported, I'm going to leave it to the 2020, that time in 2020, to that administration. Look, what I can say, and we can say very proudly and forcefully, I believe, is how this president responded to a once-in-a-century pandemic. He put forth a comprehensive strategy to move forward, to get shots in arms, money in pockets at a time where the economy was at a tailspin. And this is a president that took that very, very seriously, along with a critical partnership that he had with the vice president. And that's why we've seen the economy turn around. That's why we all sitting here today without masks on, because the president actually took this seriously and made sure that we were able to get out of the pandemic. That's what I'm going to speak to. The president said what he wanted to say yesterday, and I'll leave it as that.
I guess, is it just adding to misinformation then? Because that was the last president at that time was doing what it sounds like he thought was the right thing. Everybody needed material at that time.
I'm going to let the former president speak for himself and how he behaved and the actions that he took. That is for him to speak to. What I can speak to is what the president has done over the last 3.5 years. And look, when we came into this administration, we did not have a comprehensive strategy to deal with COVID. That did not happen. I mean, you had a former president who was telling people to inject bleach. And you have this president and this vice president who took it very seriously and put forth a comprehensive strategy to deal with a once-in-a-century pandemic. And the economy is now, just looking at the data, the economy has turned around. We are leading with the economy worldly, globally. And we are in a different place. And that is because of the leadership of this president. Some of you were in this room when the former president would come to the podium to talk about the pandemic and the lies that was spewing and what was happening. And this president took it seriously. That's what I can say. Go ahead, Gabe.
Thanks, Doreen. Regarding the Woodward book and Prime Minister Netanyahu, you said that, and you have referenced the dozen calls the president has had with the Prime Minister since the start of the war. As it was brought up last time, he hadn't had one before August 21st. In the book, Woodward reports that the president used an expletive when referring to Netanyahu and calling him a bad guy and other disparaging remarks. What's the White House response to that?
So I'll say first that, look, there's going to be many books that are written about this administration and many administration. It's a typical thing to occur. Nothing atypical about that. I'm not going to weigh in on particulars in each one of those books. What I can say to that question that you asked me, I cannot confirm. That is not something that I can confirm from here.
But does it speak to the relationship of President Biden and
And this is what I said moments ago, Gabe, which is this president and the prime minister have known each other for decades. And their conversations, their relationship have always been honest and direct. And this 30-minute conversation that they had today was also direct and very productive. And you have heard the president say he doesn't agree with everything, and they have disagreements. But because they have had this decades long relationship, they're able to be honest with each other. I think what matters here is that this administration, this president's commitment to Israel security is ironclad, and that will be continue to be the case.
Quickly on another topic, on the reporting in that book that the former President Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin at least 7 times since leaving office. Is that appropriate?
So look, we're not aware of those calls. I certainly can't confirm any of those calls from here. But if it is indeed true, are we concerned? Do we have serious concerns? Yes. If it is true, again, I cannot confirm any of those calls. Let's not forget, it is concerning, especially when we know the former president was lobbying against more aid for Ukraine to defend themselves against Russia's aggression. So if true, it is concerning. But again, I want to be really clear. I cannot confirm any of these calls.
But how is it possible that the intelligence community wouldn't know that the former president spoke with Putin?
I hear you. I just cannot confirm those calls happened.
Has not been briefed.
I cannot confirm any of these calls, Richard.
Thanks, Corinne. Given that the president canceled his foreign trip, he would have left, I think, tomorrow morning for Germany and Angola. Can you give us just a sense of what the next few days will look like as he is monitoring Milton?
Yeah.
Will he be here the whole time? Probably. Is it possible he'll go to Delaware over the weekend? Are you guys talking about a possible trip to Florida at some point already?
So as you saw this morning, the president's going to continue to get hurricane briefings, not just on Milton and how we're preparing and what's happening. Obviously, we're all certainly very much focused. He's going to be laser focused on that, as well as the vice president. And so he'll continue to be updated, continue to get those briefings. I don't have any travel to read out to you at this time, whether it is to the impacted areas or outside of that. What I can say is the president is going to continue to be laser focused on the storms and what's happening, the preparations, how we are still certainly responding to the immediate needs of folks who have been impacted by Hurricane Helene as well. That is also very much in front of us and what we're trying to do and get done there. But that's going to be his focus. You'll continue to hear more from the president. I can guarantee you that over the next couple of days. But what we want to share very, very clearly with Floridians out there, it is important to evacuate. It's important to take this storm very, very seriously. It will be catastrophic. You heard from the FEMA administrator. She is headed down to Florida to be there with her team to assist on the ground as we are pre-positioning and preparing for the storm.
Back to the phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Did the president at any point in this phone call, he said that it was constructive, urge the prime minister to not take certain actions as they relate to either the situation in Lebanon or potential retaliatory strikes against Iran?
So look, I'm going to say what I said moments ago. This was a continued discussion on the leaders level. As you know, the staff level has been talking since last week, and it is certainly to continue to speak to the response on Iran's attack and a long list of other conversations and issues that they wanted to discuss between the two leaders. I don't have anything else to speak to or to say. There's going to be a readout shortly that will have a little bit more detail of that conversation. I'm just not going to get into specifics from here.
Would it be safe to say that the president now has a clear understanding of and a clear picture of what Israel's plans are for retaliating against
What I can
Iran?
tell you is they had a discussion. They continued their discussion on a response to Iran's attack. A discussion last week, a discussion that certainly started at the staff level, and now the two leaders were able to have a productive, straightforward, honest conversation, as they tend to do. I don't have anything beyond that.
Thanks, Corinne. So Vice President Harris was also on that call between President Biden and Netanyahu. Can you just explain the role she played in that call? Did she just listen in? Did she weigh in on the issues as well?
I would refer you to her team. to speak to that.
Just going back to the contents of the call, I know there's a readout coming out soon, but can you just describe the tone of that call in terms of was the president continuing to push back on issues that were being presented to him from Netanyahu?
It was direct and it was productive. That's what I'll share.
And can we say at this point if Israel has made a decision on how they want to respond?
They continue to have a discussion on Israel's response to the attack, to Iran's attack last week. I'm not going to go into specifics or details. There's going to be a readout shortly. Okay, Michael.
Thanks, Corinne. Going back to your warnings against price gouging during the hurricanes, I'm just wondering, does the administration have any reports that that's actually happening, or was this just intended to be a preemptory strike to keep it from happening?
Well, I think certainly a preemptive attempt to keep it from happening. We're keeping a close eye on prices at the pump, at the airport, obviously, and also these hotel counters to just make sure that it doesn't happen. We tend to see this type of behavior during this time, and we want to be very, very clear. It is not okay. It is not. There's no time to do that. But certainly, when people are evacuating, when people are fearful about what's to come, especially with the historic hurricane like Hurricane Milton, we want to make sure that this is not happening. And that's why the Department of Transportation is on top of it. You have DOJ, FTC, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and so they're going to certainly take actions here. And to protect consumers. And that is what we want to make sure that we're doing. We're protecting consumers, we're protecting Americans. And so that's our focus. Okay.
Thanks, Corinne. Going back to the reporting in the Woodward book,
yeah.
If former President Trump has been speaking to President Putin, he's also had calls and meetings with other foreign leaders, both since he left office and since he announced his latest campaign for the presidency. Is the administration at all concerned that he appears to be running a shadow foreign policy while campaigning for president against the incumbent administration?
And so, look, I'm going to give you the same answer that I give to Amr here, which is, as we know, it's one president at a time. That is how we do our business here in this country, as you know, very very clearly. Look, and I said, if there was we cannot confirm this, if there was a call with President Putin, if that is indeed true, yeah, there are concerns, especially when you had the former president lobbying against Ukraine aid. Yeah, but I cannot confirm that. I cannot confirm those calls.
What about his meetings with foreign leaders such as Viktor Orban, who has opposed aid to Ukraine as well?
Look, I'm going to let the former president speak to his calls with world leaders. I'm not going to dive into that. But what I will say is that this president is focused at what's at hand, right? He had a conversation with the prime minister, 30 minutes, as I stated, half an hour. It was direct. It was very much honest. It was to show that, we're going to continue to have those discussions with Israel on how they're going to respond after Iran's attack last week. You saw what this administration, what this president directed his military to do, and our commitment to Israel's security continues to be ironclad. That is what I can speak to, and that is what we're focused on. And as you know, we have a hurricane, Milton, that's coming, and you heard from the president. So he has a lot to focus on, and as a leader, that's what he's going to do.
The same topic.
Sure.
Traditionally, when former presidents do interface with foreign leaders, there is a process by which they can liaise with the incumbent administration to be possibly briefed on any policy concerns and possibly provide a readout of those conversations afterwards. Has former President Trump availed himself of any resources that might be available to him?
I don't have anything to speak to on that particular question, but I understand your question. I just don't have anything for you at this time. Okay.
Thanks, Karin. One more try on the BB call.
Sorry.
Sure. Did the president during this conversation address the latest comments Prime Minister Netanyahu made, saying that Lebanon could experience the same level of destruction as Gaza if they don't free themselves from Hezbollah?
So look, as I stated, they had a productive and honest conversation. But what I will say very clearly about that particular question is we cannot and will not see Lebanon turn into Gaza, into another Gaza. That is not what we want to see. The suffering in both Gaza and Lebanon adds even greater urgency, as you've heard from us, to our efforts certainly to end the conflicts and lay a foundation for lasting peace and security in the region. For over a year, if you think about what has occurred for over a year, you've seen Hezbollah has attacked Israel and rejected all off-ramps to this conflict. That's what you've seen. The suffering we are seeing in Lebanon could have been avoided if Hezbollah would have stopped its rockets attacks on Israel. So, look, I'm going to just reiterate what our position is when it comes to Lebanon. We are working our way back towards a ceasefire process, and that's going to create a space to negotiate on a diplomatic resolution that only ends the fighting. That's what we're going to continue to do, and allow civilians from both sides of the blue line to return home. And we want to see that be done safely and certainly with security as well. And so that's what our focus is going to be on. Okay.
Thank you, Corinne.
I keep trying to call her. Let me let her go. Go ahead.
Thank you. So more on the Middle East.
Yeah.
At this point, does the White House understand that Israel is planning to attack energy facilities in Iran?
So we've spoken to that, and look, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. I'm not going to get into that from here. That has been asked of the president. That has been asked of us last week. What I can say is that we've had discussions. We're continuing discussions with Israel on their response to Iran's attack last week. I'm not going to dive into it. I'm not going to get into it from here. And so you saw that happening on the staff level. And now what you saw today was that happening on the leaders level. I'm not going to get into hypotheticals or speculations from here.
And how would you describe right now the relationship between the president and Netanyahu?
I mean, look, they've known each other for decades. They've known each other for decades. And because of that, they're able to have that frank conversation. Because of that, the president's able to be honest, and they're both able to be honest to each other. And I think what I can report to you, and I've said this multiple times already, the conversation that they had today was productive. And it was direct, very much in line with many other conversations that they have had, not just in the past year, but over decades. And I think you've heard the president speak directly about his relationship with the prime minister. And so they've known each other for a long time. They've had a decades-long friendship. And I think that says it all for me. Go ahead, Mandy.
Thank you. I will say in the Middle East, you said that the administration will continue evacuating U.S. citizens from Lebanon as long as the airport is open. Do you have any guarantee that Israel is not bombing the airport?
Say that one more time. The last part, I didn't hear that.
Does the White House have any guarantee that Israel will not bomb Beirut airport?
So look, we're going to have very direct conversations with the government of Israel about the shape and the nature as we speak about Lebanon specifically, right? And the ultimate scope of their campaign. And those conversations are going to continue. And I'm not going to get into specific conversations that we're having, but it will continue to be very direct. And that's what you've seen over the past year, and that's what's going to continue.
You also said that you're working towards a ceasefire and a diplomatic solution as the best outcome to the crisis. So how exactly will this materialize, considering Israel has rejected a ceasefire, a diplomatic solution, and Hezbollah leaders have been killed one after the other? So who are you talking to when you talk about ceasefire?
Look, we want to see, as the president has said, we want to reach a ceasefire deal. That's what we want to see. And again, to provide space for that diplomatic resolution, those diplomatic conversations. And we want to see civilians on both sides to return back home. And on both sides of the border, obviously. And so those discussions continue. We have been very clear that those conversations have been continuing for some time now. And ultimately, we need a diplomatic resolution. We understand that. We have to have a diplomatic resolution. And that's the only way to achieve that long-lasting stability. Right? When you think about security across the Israel and Lebanon border. And so that's what we want to see. It doesn't stop us from having those conversations, to having those discussions. Today, you heard from me, you heard from us that the two leaders spoke about an array of issues. They continued that discussion about how Israel's going to respond to Iran's attack from last week, and a bunch of other things that are incredibly important to both leaders. We'll have a readout shortly that we'll share a little bit more.
One last question. In 2 weeks, there is already 8 hospitals in Lebanon are out of service. There is thousands of people being killed. There is 1 million forced to flee their homes, and the Israelis has called in for more troops. So how can this not be a scenario in Gaza that we have seen it unfolding? And second isn't that a mission creep? How do you agree with the Israelis on the outcome of the war if Netanyahu said we're going to continue regardless of what the White House more or less is saying, as long as we are not achieving our aims in the
Look, I'm going to say what I said moments ago. We do not want to see Gaza, what happened in Gaza happen in Lebanon. That's what I said, and that is something that we do not want to see. And as we've said, Israel does have the right to defend itself, and to go after their security threats that they see. But one civilian casualty is too many, and we've been very clear about that. Israel must take every feasible precaution to prevent civilian harm. And those are the discussions that we're going to continue to have. Look, you heard from us. We announced some humanitarian assistance for Lebanon for the challenges that they're dealing with. $157 million. We announced that last week to deal with those humanitarian challenges. And so we're aware of what's going on, and we've been very clear. We've been very clear on this. Okay, Jared.
Just two kind of clarifying questions, at least clarifying for me. They may be clear for others. But have you, in the talks that the president has had with the Israeli prime minister, sort of beyond just kind of the details or the readout, is there now an expectation that Israel would inform the administration in advance of action it's planning to take against Iran?
What I can tell you that the discussions continue and how Israel's going to respond to that attack, to the attack from Iran last week. Those discussions continue. I'm not going to get into details from here.
And then just quickly on the Lebanon, you talked about kind of the efforts being made to help Americans get out.
Yeah, Americans
so far,
who are in Lebanon.
Are those all commercial flights at this point, or are you talking about like some military charters or diplomatic charters as well?
Yeah. So what I spoke to was commercial flights, and what we're trying to do, get some seats on certainly on these flights. I would refer you to the State Department. They did a very good laydown of this as well, and they're certainly helping to lead that effort. So I would refer you to the State Department on any specifics. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you, Corinne. You're pretty consistent. You don't often speculate about hypotheticals, but today on more than one occasion, you've said that if it's true that former President Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin, then that's concerning.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, why is this administration willing to speculate about that in particular?
I said, if it's true.
Speculation.
It's speculation, but if it's true, because I knew, right? We all knew that you all will have questions about for us about the national security concerns, about our thoughts about this, and so if it is indeed true, right? We're talking about President Putin here. We see what's happening in Ukraine, Russia's aggression in Ukraine. That's about democracy. That's about Ukrainians fighting for their freedom. And we've heard the former president say and lobby against the funding for Ukraine. So yeah, if it is true, it is indeed concerning, because we're talking about our national security here. So I want it to be very, very clear. And so I'll leave it there.
And then a second question.
Sure.
Does President Biden regret making Merrick Garland his attorney general, as Mr. Woodward has reported?
Look, the reason I'm able to speculate, because that's a national security concern. I wanted to be very clear about that. But as I've stated many times before, there's going to be many books written about an administration. It's very much typical And I'm just not going to comment on every specifics, every matter that comes up or any particulars that come up.
And then a national security question.
Yeah.
Mr. Woodward also reports that according to intelligence reports, White House officials here believed that there was as much of a 50% chance that Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. I mean, is that 50% odds number? Is that accurate? And if so,
yeah,
would this administration, let the American public know that that kind of risk is real?
Again, I'm not going to speak to everything that is in a book, every particular. There's going to be many books written, and we understand that. It's not atypical, but I won't respond to every piece in the book. All right, guys, got to go. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
designed to choke the life out of your fossil fuel industry. Listen to Kamala in her own words very recently.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. I am committed to passing a Green New Deal and finally putting an end to fracking once and for all. If they fail to act as President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal.